welcome to the launch of the Adaptive Leader Webinar Series 2020 with our first webinar, 3 Ways to Build Your Team's Resilience to Change. My name is Faustino John Lim, the co-founder and vice president of the Center for Asia Leadership. I'm so excited to be hosting this session today. Okay, so it looks like we are facing a lot of challenges. Number 1 is people. So the story of our lives, also communication issues, technology, time schedule, workload, actually everything, right? So especially in the last few weeks, the last several weeks, we've been facing a lot of these challenges in one way or the other. And so I think this is a good segue to our opening question to Laura. And just to frame kind of our thinking before we get into the interview, I actually want to share this slide here, which gives us a sense of where we might be since this COVID-19 crisis started. So these represent different reactions and stages we go through when we face change or upheaval in our lives. So what we want to do is, I think perhaps if you look at the slide closely, you'll see that, you know, there's shock, there's denial, there's frustration, there's depression. These are things that really influence our morale as well as our competence. So, you know, going back to kind of the title and the point for the main objective for this session, how can we move towards the upward curve, towards experimentation, decisiveness, and eventually integration? And so what are some ways we can improve and enhance our morale as well as our competence? So with that framing, I would like to introduce this first question to Laura. Laura, what does it mean to be mindful? And how does being more mindful actually result in being more resilient and helping us get to that upward curve?
Well, first, I would like to give a definition from a scientific and psychological point of view. And mindfulness is a psychological state of awareness. It's practices that promote this awareness. That could be like meditation, gardening, even just gazing out at the ocean, a mode of processing this information once you have it. And it's also considered a character trait. I'd just like to tell you how I got into mindfulness. It was a journey. It started about 20 years ago when I was in private banking. And I noticed this one colleague of mine, he was always calm under pressure and cool at meetings where there might be a heated exchange or it was very intense. So one day I asked him, I said, how is it that you are so calm? You know, it's like I wanted to be more like him. And he said it was through Zen Buddhism. Now, we can all practice mindfulness in various ways across faiths. It doesn't have to be through Buddhism, but it just happened to be my initiation into mindfulness. And I know, you know, you can have mindful practices in Christianity, in Judaism, in Islam, in Hinduism. You can even be an atheist, an agnostic, to be mindful and to have those practices that relate to mindfulness. So it was just my way of getting into mindfulness, and it's, you know, it's a learning and growing day by day, year by year. It's really a lifelong journey. It's not a one-off thing. It's something to cultivate and practice on a daily basis, or as much as you can. So this would lead me into, you know, why do we need mindfulness, especially in the work world, and it can be related to our families. It's because, you know, we're really working hard, especially in, you know, the Asia Pacific countries. There was a study done and you're working on average 75 hours a week. And what happens when you work so hard? You become tired, you become burnt out. And the good news is that the leaders at these companies realize that, being tired on the job is not productive, and they do want to introduce initiatives into the workplace to reduce stress and, create a better functioning workplace overall with happy employees. And that's where mindfulness comes in, and it builds mental resilience. And a qualitative definition of mindfulness is if you attend to your mind, you can change your life. And I feel that's very powerful. And I think we all would like to change our lives for the best in whatever way we desire. I think that is so important. And Jon Kabat-Zinn is known as the father of like modern day mindfulness. He created this 8-week mindfulness-based stress reduction program in 1979. And it didn't get really an official scientific study until 2013 by the Massachusetts General Hospital. And they realized after 8 weeks, they had a control group and then a group going through the MSBR training. And it showed that it definitely reduced stress and increased mental resilience. So there is proof that mindfulness, does build resilience and has many, many benefits. I think key components of mindfulness is to be curious, to have an open mind, to be aware. And when you practice certain mindful things like meditation, it helps you to be centered, to be calm. And again, the benefits are so many, and especially during this worldwide disruption because of the coronavirus pandemic. If you practice some mindfulness initiatives, it's going to create mental resilience in you to be able to face, what's going on and overcome the adversity wherever it's showing up in your life. In the workplace, it's also helps to uncover unconscious biases. We all have them across the world. And mindfulness, because you're more aware of a bias that may have been unconscious, but now has become conscious. So you're better able to relate to the people in your life and to your colleagues. And again, when you go back to the workplace, it increases communication skills. It increases, optimal performance of employees and better workplace functioning. And then at home, it's the same. You can use the same techniques at home with your family, and it will improve relationships, in a more harmonious and loving way. I think I just want to mention one little example with Jeff Bezos. He's a big advocate of work-life harmony, and he feels when you're happy at work, you bring that happiness back home. And when you're happy at home, you bring the happiness back to work. And therefore, everyone is much more motivated. You have happier employees, happier family members. So it's a work-life harmony, and it's a win-win for everybody. Now, I just would like you to reflect, what kind of leader do you want to be? I've chosen 2 different types of leaders. One I call the reptilian and the other mindful. The reptilian sort of evolved from the caveman times. It's the reptile part of our brain. Like, we are now in a mode of survival in a certain way because of the COVID-19 virus. So what happens with leadership? They tend to either freeze, take no action at all, or they fight and they blame it on somebody else, like the WHO organization or another country is the reason why, it's spread all over the world. Or it's just like fight, flight, or freeze. It's one of those 3 modes that people might engage in, and we all do it throughout our lives, whether it's in business or family. if a situation occurs. It's sort of a natural tendency that can happen within us. But when we're aware we're in that state of mind, then we can shift our energy and perspective and go towards being the mindful leader. And studies have said that employees love to be led by mindful leaders. And I love Mahatma Gandhi. He's one of my heroes. That's why I chose him. And he's all about compassion, peace, courage, and being aware of those around you, being mindful of other points of view. So I think the new world that we're stepping into, we're going to be finding a lot more mindful leaders. And perhaps, you know, maybe in the chat box, you can give examples of who you may think are mindful leaders, you know, in your country. It can be on the business level or, you know, the government level. That would be very interesting to know.
Laura, thank you so much for a comprehensive introduction to mindfulness and how that's related to resilience. I want to go to the next set of questions, which is, what are some actual recent examples or interesting cases of business or government leaders practicing mindfulness? And how has this actually helped their group's resilience to disruption and change?
Okay, I'll start with government leaders because the coronavirus pandemic has really touched the world. We've seen I think South Korea, for example, is doing a great job. On CNN recently, there was a study where 16 countries led by women are actually managing the crisis in the best ways. So we have something to learn from them. But since I'm in New York City, I'd like to talk about Governor Cuomo because I think he's been an exemplary leader, and he's been called America's governor because all the governors in the 50 states look to him for leadership and how he's handling the crisis. And, you know, we're in week 3 of the crisis. We're stay at home, like many of you are, you know, shelter in place or on lockdown. And he realized it was having a lot of psychological damage on the people in New York. So he created a public-private partnership with Headspace almost overnight. And normally public-private partnerships take a long time, you know, to get into being. So it was rather extraordinary that they did this partnership. And it's if you don't know it, I highly recommend the app. It's all about meditation and mindfulness content. And it's, you know, it's for the New Yorkers to help cope with this unprecedented public health crisis. And I felt like that was being mindful on his part. Another way he was being mindful was that he acknowledged all the religious holidays that are occurring around the same time, like Easter, Passover, and coming up Ramadan. And he said, I know it's tough for you. I get it. But you're just going to have to stay at home and celebrate virtually with your families. So he was being empathetic with all these different communities. And I find that is a trait, going back to the psychological definition of mindfulness, and also being aware and compassionate of, you know, all different communities. From a business point of view, I was, you know, blown away by Joe Tsai and Jack Ma, who, as all of you know, are the co-founders of Alibaba. And they donated medical supplies almost immediately when New York was most at need. And our own government wasn't stepping up to provide medical supplies. So it was rather extraordinary that these two men did step up and donate supplies. And the Joe and Clara Tsai Foundation also oversees economic mobility in Brooklyn, and they've been mindful and aware of underserved communities in New York. And I'm sure, you know, in your countries, you know, that would also be nice in the chat box to know, you know, what are your mindful leaders doing for its citizens, or what are your business leaders doing for the employees during this crisis, or even during other times of disruption? I think that would be really interesting to know. And then the last example I'd like to give is about a transformation. It's a CEO. He transformed his company through meditation, which is a practice of mindfulness. And it was after 9/11. His name is Jonathan Tang, founder and CEO of Vast Room Fashion. And he noticed his employees, like the Kubler-Ross curve, were in a state of shock. They were frustrated, they were sad, they were depressed, they were distracted. They weren't able to work productively at all. And then he brought in a meditation facilitator for his employees, for them to meditate 20 minutes every day. And it was, you know, a lengthy program. And at the end of the program, you know, he asked his employees, you know, how they felt and what were the benefits. And there were employees who had never meditated before in their life. And there were some who knew a little bit about meditation. And they all said it helped them to be calmer, it helped them to focus at work, and it carried over to their families at home. So going back to Jeff Bezos and his work-life harmony, you know, it's true. So I just think there are just so many benefits to the practice of mindfulness.
So our last question is, what are some practical ways to build our teams or even our families' resilience to change? What are some 3 takeaways that we can perhaps even practice maybe in the next week or so?
Okay, I'd like to start with the definition of resilience so we're all on the same page. It's the ability to bounce back and beyond when faced with adversity. And this actually comes from a resilience expert, Ann Maston. And the 3 quick ways, you know, I wanted them to be really simple so that you could do them right away. Again, starting with meditation. So cultivating mindfulness through meditation. And we can even do this right now. I mean, you can do this in the office, like when you're under stress or it's a really busy day. You take the 5-minute purposeful pause. And let's do it right now. Just close your eyes. And on a count of 3, inhale. And hold the breath for 3 counts. 1, 2, 3. And then exhale on a count of 1, 2, 3. And let's do it again. Breathe in. Hold your breath. Breathe out. One more time. Breathe in. 1, 2, 3. And then breathe out. And perhaps you have felt what that feels like in your body at that moment. You may feel more relaxed and calmer. So this is a really quick way. It helps you to increase your focus, increase your performance at work. You can do it by yourself, with your team, or with your family. It's just really an easy technique to implement. And then the second way, which is more fun, is blocking out time and having a virtual lunch with your colleagues, and hopefully soon in person. And not to have a business lunch, just, you know, check in with everyone's feelings, like going back again to the Kubler-Ross curve, especially during these times. Are you feeling sad or frustrated? or maybe you're feeling better. You're feeling like we're going to be out of this. We're in transition, going up the curve towards integration into our brave new world. And get to know them as human beings. And I think in a way, this pandemic is a wake-up call for us to treat people as human beings and not like as a cognitive machine or like the what. Like a lot of us, our identities are based on our work, but we're much more than that. So this is a nice way to integrate maybe knowing about the hobbies of your colleague. And when you know these things, you get a more holistic perspective of your colleagues, and this also increases better communications for your team. It strengthens the connection between your team. It increases engagement and motivation, and also increases happiness. And again, it can be done with your family, your friends, as well, as with your colleagues. And then the last way, again, it's a simple way because I wanted to have three quick takeaways for you. When you're feeling stressed or overwhelmed at the office or in front of your computer, just walk around the office or your home or outside the office or your home. It can be a 5-minute walk. It could be, a 10-minute walk. It could be you going out to get a coffee. Anything that you feel will clear your head and emotions. It also could be listening to music. And then when you're back, you're going to be feeling much calmer, clear, and focused so that you can effectively solve problems. So then just to sum up, the 3 quick ways to build your teams and families' resilience to change. Number 1, cultivate mindfulness through meditation. Number 2, block out time and have a virtual lunch with your colleagues. Number 3, walk around your office or home or outside of the office or home when stressed to become clear. So that's how I'll wrap it up, and I am, most grateful to be here chatting with John, and hope you're all learning a little bit about mindfulness and becoming more resilient in today's world.
Thank you, Laura. So we're actually not done yet. It looks like we do have about 12 minutes, 10 to 12 minutes or so to be open for some questions. I really got a lot from your presentation, and there was one example that was from Mr. Ridwan about how he shared an example from his prime minister. I believe it's Malaysia, if I'm not mistaken, how he practices mindfulness through his speeches and announcements during the crisis. And he was mentioning how his language is very personal and makes him very relatable. And I think, especially as leaders, like during a crisis, they look to authority figures. And I think one of the things he mentioned is that after he hears that his prime minister's speeches, people do actually feel comforted. They feel kind of that things are kind of more in order for them to work well. So the chat box, so the Q&A box is actually open right now. We already have some questions, and I would actually like to begin with this one question. So how can you balance, Laura, how can you balance between immediate decision-making and pausing to strategize for the longer term as a leader? I mean, how does mindfulness kind of play into that?
Well, I think with mindfulness, you can take a step backwards and, reflect. And some decisions have to be made very quickly. And if that happens and you make a mistake, then, you acknowledge the mistake you've made, you reiterate, you re-strategize, and you make a new plan and make a new decision. Other times we do have the time to step back, reflect, gather different points of views from all the varying experts, and, create perhaps worst case scenarios, hoping for best achievable outcomes. through strategic planning. And I just think mindfulness helps you to be, like when you're calmer, you definitely are making decisions based on evidence, versus if you're making a decision out of fear, that's usually the worst way to make a decision. So I think mindfulness plays a good part in better decision making.
Okay, so we have another question from Cheryl Wong. I believe she's from Malaysia. So she thanks you for the 3 tips, and she's thinking there must be more that can be done to building the team's resilience. What are your thoughts on reframing mindsets, on reframing mindsets? Sorry, just got on reframing mindsets. What are your thoughts on that? Reframing mindsets and values and helping them think in that sense.
Well, that would take a longer time, because for people to shift their mindset is a challenge, and because you have to shift your behavior as well, and it takes time, and that's why they usually say like a mindfulness program over 8 weeks works better than if you just try it once. So it's practice. Building resilience in your team, a lot of it is through experience, and it can be unexpected crises that build resilience, because again, resilience is overcoming adversity, and we usually don't do this unless we're forced to. Because I think in general, we just go along in our lives until a crisis occurs, and then we deal with it as it occurs. And while you're dealing with it, that is actually building up the muscle of resilience within you. You may not be aware, but it is happening. And mental resilience is very important as well, and psychological resilience is important.
Mm-hmm. So we have another question. Jeremy Tan, he asks, what are the barriers to implementing mindfulness?
If it's with a team or even a family member, I would say that they're not open to learning something new. They don't have like that learning and growth mindset that's necessary to try a new thing. So I would say not being open would be the biggest barrier.
And so what are some ways that we can actually overcome, perhaps when our colleagues are not so open to these types of practices? Like how do we, are there any tips or strategies that tactics that you can give us to try to bring that, to the team or to your organization?
Yeah, I think I would try to have like a learning conversation with this person, maybe in a diplomatic way, find out maybe there's some underlying fear that makes him afraid to try a mindful practice. Try to figure out from his point of view, like where is he coming from? And maybe it's revealed, and then maybe he or she, might laugh like, oh, I didn't realize that about myself, and then maybe they would be willing to go forward. But again, there are those who it's very hard to change their mindset and they won't change. And there you have to also just be compassionate. That's who they are. They're not going to change and they don't want to change. And it's okay. They're always the outliers. So you just have to accept it and be compassionate with their point of view.
And I like what you said earlier. At the end of the day, like for some people, it's really about the bottom line, and they have a very realistic and kind of skeptical view of the world. At the end of the day, it helps with your decision making. You can't make, holistic, prescient decisions if you have these emotional kind of barriers in front of you, right? So we have another question from Terrence Leong. Burnout is related to disengagement. So what is the leader's role here in being mindful?
Well, I would say to prevent burnout and tiredness and being mindful of his workers, his employees, realizing that, you know, you can be productive in work in a shorter amount of time. You don't have to work these 75-hour weeks. You know, being mindful of the person's well-being. I think those are, you know, issues that are very important in today's work world. And Ariana Huffington is really big on sleep, like getting your 8 hours of sleep every night. And when you're rested, your body is rested, you're better able to perform. So I think, you know, the mindful leader should be aware of all these things, have better, you know, productivity from his employees.
Definitely. We have a question that was actually voted up. It's Cheryl Wong again, and she asks, during step one, your first tip, during step one, during the actual meditation or reflection period, what is actually going through your mind? What do you practice, meditate, or reflect on? What's in your head when that happens? I think that's her question.
That's a good question. I think if you're a beginning meditator, you can have like 1,000 thoughts in your head, you know, running around, and it's okay. And what they say is just to sort of observe all those thoughts, almost like watching clouds, you know, float across the sky, and not be attached to them. Just be detached, watch them. You know, you could giggle and laugh at them, whatever may pop up in your head. I wouldn't worry about it. Okay. And then with practice, hopefully the chatter inside your head becomes less, you know, with time, over time.
Okay, so we have a question from Wen Li Ho. Apart from going for a walk outside the office or your home, which is actually not an option where she is, which is in Malaysia. It's day 30 for many of the people in Malaysia who are confined at home. What would be an alternative idea that you could share with us, kind of along those lines?
Well, if you're in your home, you could exercise, you could do yoga, you could dance to music, anything to relax you, whatever makes you happy.
Okay, those are good ideas. Okay, we have a question from Arvin Daniel. Through your presentation, I could understand progressively about how to build resilience. However, how do we get our families or employees to react to change in a way that's not a knee-jerk reaction? How can we encourage them as leaders to do that?
Can you like reframe the question?
Sure. Through your presentation, I could understand how we as individuals can build our resilience. But when we relate to our families or our employees who are just really not like that, how do we help them not react to change in a knee-jerk way?
Oh, okay. That's sort of like, yeah. Almost going back to the reptilian type of reaction with anger or fighting or freezing or fleeing. I would say again, you have to accept the employee or your family member where they are, like in their learning development. And be compassionate, but you can also have what I like to call learning conversations, and you know, maybe after they have their knee-jerk reaction, when they're in a calmer moment, have a chat with them and discuss it. You know, discuss the issue and ask them what caused you like to react in this way. I just want to understand. And then that person probably will feel heard and seen, and he might or she might soften up and see, you know, his or her point of view, and that would better relations between the two. It's about communication.
Definitely. So we actually have one more question. This is similar, but this is from Nancy Ramos from the Philippines. She asks, what if I'm in that position, but I'm a subordinate and my boss is not, you know, very open or receptive to these things? How do I help him or her become a more resilient person, perhaps through mindfulness or other means?
Yeah, that's a tricky question. Because he's your boss. And again, I would just have a conversation with him, explore, you know, how he feels about mindful practices. Would he be open to having them in the office, maybe just to try it once to see how it is? And if he likes it, great. And if not, that's okay too. But yeah, that's a difficult question and a very good question.
So looks like we're just about ran out of time. I want to thank you so much, Laura, for spending the time. I know it's actually very late there. It's 11:40 p.m. in New York. So thank you so much for taking the time. We will be sending the slides, and if there are, I'm so sorry that we couldn't answer all your questions. Please do feel free to email us or write in the comment box at the end of this session if you have any other further questions. We will also be sending Laura's contact information later. So I'd just like to thank you, John, too, and the team. You've been fantastic, and it's been a lot of fun. No, thank you so much, Laura. So we do need to make just a couple of very quick announcements before we go. So if you look at the screen, you're going to see 3 webinars that are scheduled in the next few weeks. Now, I'm only actually showing you 3 right now, but we actually have several that are currently being planned and that will be coming up actually over the next few months. So please do stay tuned to our channels, as we will be providing updates almost daily with very interesting and relevant topics, as well as other good speakers as well. And also, we want to ask you, are you interested in bringing this to your organization? So if you are, get in touch with us for perhaps blended learning leadership development programs that can be customized. So we can have a webinar, virtual live lecture for a group in your organization. We are also designing blended online learning programs, and this can be as short as 4 weeks up to 10 to 12 weeks. And we are in the midst of doing that and delivering that as well. So lastly, we'd also like to connect with you. So please do visit Laura's website as well as her social media channels. And please do visit ours as well. So our website URL is here. Our social media handles are here as well. And then you can also contact us at any time over email. So lastly, if you could fill out the exit survey that will pop up when you leave, that is actually going to provide us with very valuable feedback to continue improving our webinar going forward. And lastly, thank you all for your time today. We hope you've had we hope that you do have a wonderful rest of the day. If you are in the other side of the world, like Laura, we hope that you have a good night's rest. And we do hope that you and your loved ones stay safe during this time. And with that, thank you so much. And we hope to see you next time.
Thank you. Namaste.